Hi, everyone. This is Martin Willis with podcastufo.com. Today's episode is our second session with Don Schmitt on Roswell. How you doing, Don?
Yeah, it's great to be with you again, Martin. So it's been too long, but it's all my fault, and I accept responsibility. But those of us who are tend to be a little bit more obsessed with our research, we tend to disappear in the woodwork at times because we like to become flies on the walls of certain witnesses and the like, and we have to hide our actions at times. But nothing nefarious, but nonetheless, we're the proactive investigators who are out in the trenches still trying to solve, this ultimate mystery, which we believe is the biggest story of the millennium.
Yes. No, I appreciate the time that actually has gone by because more things have happened, so there's more to talk about.
There always is, and that's the amazing thing. Even Larry King a number of times mentioned to us that, for a story that is now over 50, as it turns out now, 65 years old, it comes back stronger every year, no matter how the debunkers, no matter how often the government tries to explain it away, it still keeps rising to the surface. And myths don't do that. Hoaxes don't do that. Once they're, explained away, that typically is the end of it. But it's the truth that keeps bubbling to the top. And that's why I'm so confident that we're dealing here with a legitimate situation, because it keeps trying to come out as it truly happened. The witnesses, even to their deathbeds, continue to come forward, not by us insisting that they do so, but their families so often seek us out. We need to tell you about what my husband just said, what my father just said, that type of thing. And it's the same story over and over again, that indeed we recovered a flying saucer back in 1947.
In the last podcast we did together, a real quick recap, you explained the situation and also about the witnesses, and the number of witnesses was somewhere around 600, direct or indirect.
Yeah.
And out of those 600, the thing that really struck in that podcast with me is out of those 600 witnesses that not one single witness said that it could have been a weather balloon or crash dummies or the mogul.
That's true. That remains true.
So
after all these years, yes.
Yeah, that right there, that says a little bit right there.
Oh, it certainly does. Yeah. I just imagine if I was a government defense attorney, defense in the sense that, say we would actually take a legal step, we would have a class action suit representing all the civilians who were involved, who directly were threatened by officials, by military officers within our own United States government to essentially keep their mouths shut about what they knew to be the truth. And under the, penalties of death. I mean, as we described in the previous program, how parents were told, we will kill your children if you ever discuss this again, if you ever talk about this in public. Well, what could be so sensitive involving civilians that in strict violation of the United States Constitution, the United States government would use its own military to threaten its own citizenry? And so we would take a class action suit, just as a hypothetical. And they had to defend their actions. Well, first of all, they have to explain why they came up with the counter solution, the counter explanation being that it was a common weather balloon device with a radar reflector kite, if again it was something else. And then some 50 years later, they would come up with another theory, as it turned out, Project Mogul, which was a similar balloon device, but it was a top-secret project back in 1947, in that it was determining whether the Soviets were detonating their own atomic devices post-World War II. And the concept was that we would pick up a shock wave in the upper atmosphere. Okay, fine. The project was top secret, but certainly the components were not. It was still a balloon. And the last one being the anthropomorphic wooden crash dummies. So they'd have to defend all of these silly counter, ploys to essentially suppress this, bury this, cover this up. And then they first would have to demonstrate and prove why it necessitated, the need to threaten American citizens. Again, if it wasn't something so ultra-secret, so sensitive, so unbelievable, that they had to resort to even death threats. So I would love to see this, play out in a court of law. We've been approached by a number of TV networks in the past, if we'd even be interested in such a scenario, actually taking Roswell to court. In fact, after our next book, which is on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the next book on Roswell will be essentially Roswell's Day in Court. The tentative title is Roswell, the Final Verdict. And we will present it as we would, given such an opportunity, how this would play out, and how these over 600 witnesses directly or indirectly involved, sadly most of them now deceased, but nonetheless that their testimony is on the public record. They have signed affidavits. They have given video depositions. They have told us in non-contradictory terms that this indeed did happen, that this was something not manufactured here, this was something not made on this earth, that as the one officer said, they sure weren't from Texas in reference to the bodies, and on and on and on. And as you mentioned, Martin, there are no witnesses that refute that. The skeptics constantly, dredge up, not even in any way, as far as witnesses, to support what they can only present as personal attacks on the witnesses, attacks on us. And to me, that's a losing hand. Because the wealth of circumstantial and evidentiary, information regarding this incident is just beyond the human pale. The idea that over 600 people would be telling us the same story. A police officer should be so lucky in investigating any crime that you'd have a dozen witnesses, and if they would all tell you the same account.
Right.
People's observational capacities just aren't, that in tune with even their immediate environment at any one given time. So this too smacks of just how profound, how unique this was. It has stood the test of time. It remains indelibly etched in their subconsciouses, and whenever they're asked about it, as one of the witnesses described, it's the first thing I think about in the morning, and it's the last thing I think about at night.
Wow. Now, you mentioned just a few minutes ago about the death threats. Have you spoken to more than one person that has said the same thing on that?
Oh, yes. In fact, one of the more recent accounts involved the wife of Peter Anaya, who worked out at the base at that time and was involved in picking up the Lieutenant Governor, Joseph Montoya, at that time with his brother, Reuben, and another individual who also worked out at the base. And his wife would describe that a number of military officers arrived at their home that evening and insisted that her husband come outside, but she could still overhear all the yelling, the conversation as it took place, as it went down. And basically they're telling her to stay into the house, stay out of it, but insisting that her husband never say a word about what happened, and that if they ever did, they would be killed.
Wow.
And she wasn't even directly involved, and so they used her as leverage. They used her to really, as far as emphasize the fact that this is something, again, that can never come out. Again, it speaks quite profoundly of just how important this was and the extreme levels to which they had to resort to make sure that people didn't talk about it.
So back several months ago, we were going to record at 7 p.m., I believe, your time, and you were hot on the trail of something to do with Roswell, and
yes.
we couldn't hook up. Can you talk about what that was at the time?
I can go into it briefly because it's something we're still working on. In fact, we're working on it every day because it could involve physical evidence.
Oh.
And as a result, it involved a quick, unscheduled trip and actually meeting with someone who is in possession of said material. And we're talking specifically regarding the remains, something, pertaining to the bodies.
Oh.
So this is beyond material or even physical material from the craft, the ship, the crash site, that type of thing. So it's something new. It's something we've had a number of false alarms regarding in the past. Mm-hmm. But this particular situation is much more promising.
Wow, biological, more or less.
Yes.
Wow.
I won't put it that way either because I don't want to. I'm being very careful.
Yes.
Because again, people's lives may be at risk, and I have to be careful not to certainly telegraph our actions. Mm-hmm. But let's just say it will either go down as a tremendous hoax that people went through a tremendous effort and expense to try to perpetrate this. And if not, it potentially is a smoking gun.
Wow.
And so stay tuned.
It could finally put this thing to bed, basically, which would be nice.
I would like to think so, but given the skeptical mindset of especially the American press, the American media, that enough will never be enough. It comes down to when will it be enough for us, that we can walk away and just go mission accomplished and feel justified in our essentially shutting down the effort. I'd like to believe it's sometime in the near future. I'd like to believe that it could happen as soon as tomorrow if our efforts, continue to produce results. But nonetheless, I have to resign myself to accept that enough may never be enough. That it is still something that, again, we have to keep in mind that the powers that be, starting at the time of the incident, 1947, decided that this was never to come out. And I don't mean that it was going to be just a 5-year, lag time, or 10 years, or even 50 years. It's quite evident that the way they have buried this, the manner by which as many people have died with this, and not passing it down. As I've often said, the old order in the military is not passing it down to the new. So it's not like there's even a continuing project, a continuing effort to solve this. It's like they've always had the answer, but yet they don't have any answers. That being the cover-up of ignorance. They have the physical proof, but they don't have any motives. They don't know from where, from why, or from who. And they still can't plug it in. They still can't make it work, so to speak, as far as reverse engineering or developing any technology as a result of this recovery back in 1947. So I would think out of even frustration, lack of any return on their part for all of their efforts in these past 65 years, that they just have washed their hands of it. And it's like the phenomenon exists, it's there, and there's nothing we can do about it. And how do they go to the public? How do they, announce to the world that we've been visited, we are being visited, that aircraft are flying through our airspace with total impunity for all these years, and we can't do anything about it? Well, I mean, what elected official is going to make that announcement?
Right. And if it was, it would have to be, for all the skeptics to actually believe it, it would probably have to be the President of the United States live on TV announcing it, or maybe not even then.
Not even then, because let's cite the most recent example as far as with the assassination of Osama bin Laden. And there it was, a case of the President Obama, going before the American people and making that very announcement. and even going into some detail on how it was accomplished and the steps that led up to their finally discovering his whereabouts, and then how he was killed. And nonetheless, within days after, there were version after version after version.
Yeah, conspiracy.
And it was like I was doing a talk in Illinois shortly thereafter, and I jokingly even made the announcement that major terrorist, the man behind 9/11, who had instrumented as far as that fatal attack, as far as on our own shores, had finally been killed by American troops. And then I posed the question: now, which version are we, asked to believe? Which one are we going to believe? Was it Navy SEALs? Was it Air Force Delta Force? Was it Army Special Forces in conjunction with one another? Or how many troops were involved? Was there an actual gunfight that took place? And on and on and on. And demonstrating that, again, even if the president makes such a statement, such an announcement, it still comes down to the cynic in so many of us. It's sad that it's become the case with the press, with elected officials. We look every time there is a popularity poll taken as far as job performance and even profession, we always see that politicians rate right at the bottom. And yet the military rates still very highly. Now, the military rates highly and justifiably. They are certainly, on the front lines. They are preserving our freedoms, our liberties. They're, taking all of the risk right now while we sit very calm, very, very snugly in our homes every night, and they so often don't even know if they're going to see tomorrow.
Right.
They deserve all of the accolades, all of the credit they so rightly deserve. But who instructs them? Who directs them? It's the very politicians who are at the other end of the rung, other end of the ladder. So it's so often that the military has to sell its soul to the devil, so to speak. And so we get back to 1947. The fact that the military, just coming off of World War II, we were at probably our highest patriotic, level in our country's history. The military walked on water at that time.
Yeah.
And yet, it was the politicians in Washington, in conjunction with the Pentagon and the commander-in-chief, who I'm sure issued the instructions, and that being President Harry Truman at that time. You do what you have to. And that's what always provides a president or any politician plausible deniability. But you instruct your subordinates, your people in the field. You do what you have to. And I don't have to know about it. And as a result, they didn't go to the Army manual because what chapter, what reference do they have? Now, how do we deal with the recovery of a crashed flying saucer? It just wasn't there. This was totally unprecedented. Skeptics would like to water down, this position that back in 1947, I've even heard the remark that, well, some of the people involved were UFO buffs. Well, first of all, the term UFO was not even germane at that time. It wouldn't even be developed for 4 more years. And specifically by Captain Edward Ruppelt, who was first director of Project Blue Book. But the notion that there was anything, any books, anything on TV or in the movies at that time, the common depiction of alien spacecraft by Hollywood back at that time were rockets.
Right.
And if we go back to Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, even aliens were just human beings just wearing costumes.
Right.
So we have to do our homework. We have to be accurate. And that's why, even with the best evidence, I think it still comes down to if we are confident that it satisfies our last concerns, half the people are going to believe us, and half it will never matter. And again, if I feel I've done due diligence, my partner Tom Carey and I, the rest of our team, that we have provided the final solution beyond any doubt, it will be mission accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It won't matter what the press, it won't matter what the politicians say. We will know that we have proven it to ourselves. And I guess after all is said and done, it all comes down to, well, what do we hold to be the truth? What do we truly believe as being factual? It doesn't matter what the next person believes.
Mm-hmm. We have some listener questions I'm going to read to you in a few minutes. But the last time we spoke in our last podcast, you talked about you were going to do a little more research into Frank Kaufman, and I wondered,
yes.
Have you done any of that since we last spoke?
To be honest with you, Martin, no. Granted, I mean, there are a lot of questions still remaining, but because Mr. Kaufman has already passed away, mm-hmm. and even though he was our star witness in our second book in 1994, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, that I co-authored with Dr. Kevin Randall, and since that time, Kaufman, we were the ones responsible for exposing him as being totally fraudulent, that even the documents, his background, everything that he presented to us was not true. He was not a witness to the Roswell event as he described. He may have had some cursory involvement, but to the point of your question, because he's already passed away, he's in our grave basket at the moment, mm-hmm. because there's a greater urgency to still deal with the people still with us, find them, give them an opportunity to go on the record. So, but yes, it's something down the road that will definitely be looked into. We strongly suspected Mr. Kaufman had marching orders. He was minding the store, so to speak, mm-hmm. living in Roswell, and he latched onto us as quickly as he did, and he didn't let go. If he didn't hear from us in a week or two, he would actually call me up. And, what new witnesses have you talked to, Don? What's new? Like he was reporting to someone.
Right.
But for another program.
Yeah. You mentioned a few minutes ago that your team of people, so it's you, Kevin, and do you have other people working with you?
Yeah, Kevin Randall, Dr. David Rudiak, who's a professor of optometry, who specializes in photo interpretation, Anthony Bagalia, Chris Wachowski up in Canada, and Professor Frank Kimmler, who will be talking about in the balance of the program. And there's even an attorney who works with us, named Christopher Carson. And with him, we're submitting more and more Freedom of Information Act requests. So we're hitting them from all directions because we realize it's the fourth quarter. And we have the ball as